Welcome everyone to the Wednesday, January 20th, 2021 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission. We will conduct this meeting similar to an in-person meeting, so public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 920-6092. 6488. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16 and some other places. So now I'm going to ask Kayla to call the roll.
Thank you, Molly. And I wanted to make one quick announcement pertaining to our commission roster. So we are welcoming Nicholas Hutchinson tonight, who many of the commissioners have met previously, either in person or through other commission Zoom meetings. And Nick has joined us in staff support for particular projects and presentations. He is now joining as a non-voting commissioner as the designee for the city administrator. So welcome, Nick. Thank you for being here. And thank you also to City Administrator Tom Crawford for the time that Mr. Crawford served as the representative for the Transportation Commission over the past few months. So with that announcement, I will now call the roll. Please say here when your name is called. Commissioner Balderrama?
Here.
Commissioner Boland?
Here.
Councilmember Briggs?
Here.
Commissioner Felt?
Here.
Commissioner Hadimaki?
Here.
Commissioner Hull?
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman?
Here.
Commissioner Parsons?
Here.
Commissioner Smith? Commissioner Summers?
Yeah.
Commissioner Dolan? Commissioner Hess?
Here.
Commissioner Hutchinson?
Here.
Commissioner Margolis? Lieutenant Mike Sherba?
Sorry, I'm here.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Stupka? We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you, Kayla. So next we're going to move on to approval of the consent agenda. Are there any modifications to the consent agenda? I don't see any. So is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Commissioner Feltz, and a second. Commissioner Hadimaki. All those in favor of the motion, we're going to physically raise hands. All those opposed and abstentions, it passes. Okay, so now we're going to move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID number 920-6092-6488. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. And please state your name at the beginning of your comments. Kayla, do we have anyone for public comment?
Not currently.
Okay, and as we've been doing, if someone comes in later, we will pause and give them a chance to make their comment. So next we move on to, now we invite Commissioner Hess to provide an update on the neighborhood slow streets.
And I'll make a quick announcement as we transition. Welcome, Commissioner Smith. I see you've joined the meeting and I will update the commission attendance to reflect that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you, Raymond Hess. The chair had asked me to provide kind of a brief overview of the Neighborhood Slow Streets program from the deployment that we did last year as part of the Healthy Streets program. Again, I know most of you are familiar with this, but when council passed resolution back in May that pretty much established the Healthy Streets program, there were several different kind of directives included therein. And one of them was to create what we now call the Neighborhood Slow Streets program, which was part of Healthy Streets. The idea was to alert motorists to the possible presence of pedestrians and cyclists in local neighborhood streets, and thereby hopefully slowing those vehicles down and or cutting down on cut-through traffic. So the way the program was rolled out was after the passage of that resolution in May, staff had launched an online engagement tool. It was a mapping function where people could make recommendations for healthy streets. And we use this pretty heavily to determine and identify local neighborhood streets that would be suitable or had support for a slow street sort of treatment. We also used it for the bigger arterial lane reconfigurations that we did. We won't go into that today, short of an update later on in the meeting. And one of the things you may recall when we first reported on this last year, initially we were looking at kind of different thresholds in terms of what would qualify a street for inclusion as a neighborhood slow street. We looked pretty heavily at kind of the process we used for traffic calming. We kind of walked that back a little bit because, you know, this was during the height of the pandemic or the early onset of the pandemic, and it was a little difficult to determine what the best way was for residents to kind of voice support for such an initiative. And so ultimately where we landed was streets that had multiple requests. Roughly about 5 requests or more is kind of the threshold we were using internally to determine if there was enough support. And we had to make sure, we did cross-check to make sure that the people who were submitting that suggestion or recommendation for Neighborhood Slow Street identified themselves as living on that street. This was some direction we had gotten from council that those who are most affected by these treatments should have the ultimate say. And so, you know, people lived on the street and we had multiple people who lived on that street that supported it, we would put it into the hopper. And so probably starting in June or July, we started to deploy these Healthy Streets treatments. We did so by first putting out a yard sign kind of at the end points of the street, kind of a teal colored little, almost like a political sign that you see in people's yards, but it wasn't political. It just said, you know, this street was nominated for a healthy street. For more information, and we had contact information in the website. There's also a QR code, if I remember correctly, that people could scan that would take you to the website. And what that was meant to do was 2 things. It was meant to kind of notify residents that, you know, this treatment was coming. And the other thing that it also kind of allowed for is there was an opt-out clause that, again, council had directed us to make sure that, you know, maybe 5 residents on the street voiced support for it, but maybe the majority of folks didn't want it. And so if we had heard from more than 20% of people living along that street that said, nope, we don't want it, or take it down, we would take it down. Now, that never came to pass, I will say. Most of the Healthy Streets that we ended up deploying were very well received by the community. And so we actually did, I think, 3 different iterations of Healthy Streets. There was kind of the first batch that went out as a result of the public engagement tool. We had also identified some kind of neighborhood streets where there were low-income housing and some other kind of equity concerns that were included in the deployment as well. And then, you know, because there's sometimes some positive banter that happens maybe on Nextdoor or whatever, more people wanted, you know, Healthy Streets. After they saw these deployed, we got a second round and third round of requests that came in as well. And so we did deployments kind of later in the summer as well. All said and done, and you know, unfortunately I didn't prepare the exact number, but we had a couple dozen deployments that we ultimately did. And they were all fairly successful. There were a couple concerns that were raised on a few of them. So for example, probably the one that received the most pushback was Sunset. Sunset, kind of north of the Water Hill neighborhood, is kind of a a known cut through for those that are coming from the north and heading into downtown. Ironically, maybe not ironically, but this is probably why it was submitted for Healthy Streets consideration in neighborhood slow streets. Many of the people who objected actually didn't live on the street. They were people who were perhaps driving on the street. And so following council's direction, we were really listening to the residents and neighbors on that street for contemplation of installation or removal. And we never got any strong opposition from anyone who lived along the street itself. And so all, Sunset and all the others remained. The other kind of concern that was raised was the sort of spillover effect. And this is, where maybe one street had a treatment, but a parallel street, one over, didn't have a treatment, and therefore maybe saw a little bit of increased cut-through traffic that would have otherwise used, the street that was now a slow street. I will state these were soft closures. So the closure is, it had a type 3 barricade. Those are the barricades with kind of the 3 bars across it. It had, a bicycle pedestrian symbol sign, and then slow streets as well. And so that was really meant to kind of communicate what was happening. I think some of the signage also said local traffic only or no through traffic as well. But I will say, that those were soft closures and that it still allowed residents to get to their homes. And, quite frankly, there was no hard enforcement of these deployments, right? They were kind of suggestions, but part of the Healthy Streets, we wanted to be very sensitive to enforcement on these issues. Obviously go back to last summer, we're at the height of kind of the Black Lives Matter movement, and we didn't want to, use enforcement as a tool on neighborhood slow streets to, kick people out of neighborhoods. That wasn't the right approach. So it was all meant to kind of really just draw attention to the possible presence of bicyclists and pedestrians in the roadway and alert motorists to kind of proceed with caution as they drove down these streets. Now, one of the things that, if you followed City Council last night, they did authorize design funding for a 2021 deployment for Healthy Streets. That recommendation started with this body last month in December, and therefore we drafted a resolution that was sponsored by the mayor. I believe Councilmember Briggs as well sponsored that resolution, and it passed last night. So one of the things that I would like to kind of ask this body is if you have any thoughts about how neighborhood slow streets could be deployed for the next iteration. And, one of the reasons why I think that's important is, we could tackle it many different ways. We could start from scratch. But if we want to kind of pick up where we left off last fall with maybe some sort of communication effort back to those neighborhoods, maybe it's, as simple as putting those signs back up, knowing what that could and should look like would be helpful for us so that we can start to mobilize on that as soon as possible. Again, this body had recommended that we try to target for a deployment by April. And so we're trying to line up all of those ducks in a row now so that we can try to hit that target.
Great, thank you so much. So we'll take feedback, questions, comments, and just raise your hand. And if I don't see you, say something. Commissioner Hadamaki.
Thank you. Big fan of the program, and we were very eager for them to be deployed this past year, and but looking forward to them this year. And 2 comments. The first is that I don't know if you could consider or would consider putting up the same soft barricades on feeder streets onto the slow street. I think especially one example is Granger east of Packard. It has 4 or 5 feeder streets, and it's maybe 4 or so blocks long of the Healthy Street up to Verdun. And so you'd be walking, you'd see people all the time turn onto Granger from one of the feeder streets. They had no idea they're on a Healthy Street and behaved as such. So I don't know if that's a huge cost driver or not. And then secondly, I'm not sure if you're going to consider the barricades themselves, or I think it kind of goes along with the healthy streets overall, where it had a construction feel to it, and maybe that led people to ignore it or be confused or not understand the purpose of it, which is to slow down and watch for kids and people. So I don't know if there's going to be opportunity to have barriers that are more clear about what really the intent is. I know you had the small healthy street sign, which is great. It's something, but I don't know. Those are my two thoughts.
Yeah, Commissioner Hadamaki, thank you for both of those comments. And those are right on point. One of the things that we really want to revisit are, to your latter point, the sort of devices that we deploy. That was a common sort of concern that was raised last year, was that everything kind of felt like a construction zone, and when there's no construction being present, it kind of led to some confusion. Just for what it's worth, and again, this is not meant to be defensive posturing, but all of the traffic control devices we used, we did so just straight from the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, the Michigan Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And we did that by design, so that way we wouldn't have to design, right? So the idea was type 3 is an approved sort of thing, and we can just plot that up in their deployment guidelines in terms of how those are deployed, and it doesn't require engineering drawings. And that even holds true for the city's deployment on the arterials as well when we did the lane closures. Again, we want to rethink a lot of that for the 2021 deployment. And so I think the type 3 barricades is, going into some of the neighborhoods, I would say in large part it didn't pose a problem, but there were some instances that we're aware of where those large barricades did present a bit of a maneuvering problem. The best example that I heard was at Chapin, right off of Huron, that, for vehicles that were turning off of Huron, if there was a car waiting to turn off of Chapin onto Huron and the barricade was there, it was very difficult for a car to kind of maneuver. And obviously, Huron being what Huron is, you don't want cars backing onto Huron. So what we ended up doing to address that was we just moved the barricade back. But if we looked at a different type of device, so for example, in some communities I saw construction barrels or the sort of sawhorse style barricades that had signage on them, much smaller, then that might be a possibility to add for a little bit, still provide kind of the notice and the signage, while at the same time, giving a little bit more flexibility in terms of maneuverability. And then to that point as well, I think if we use a smaller device, I think it'll be perhaps easier to deploy at some of those cross streets that you mentioned. That, setting up type 3 barricades at every single, 4-way intersection starts to really add up quickly and feel a little, perhaps a little too much. And so if we come up with maybe a different sort of softer feel or a softer sort of device that can be deployed, then maybe that gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of where we can put them. So it's definitely something we're thinking about. I will say, with council's approval last night for the design, this is one of the issues we want to ask the engineer to help us just kind of think through and really help us identify what those opportunities are.
Raymond, just a quick question on the enforcement. That's kind of where we would come in. If it came to that, is that something that the commission or the council wants to see? Do they want to see the police enforce these things, or is it just they're put out there for, we hope people will get the message and act appropriately?
Well, I think you raise a great question, because, another thing that we heard was these things were great and effective the first week, but then especially on popular cut-through streets, people quickly learned that they could just kind of drive around the barricade and just pretend like it didn't exist. We met with Deputy Chief Forsberg, before these were rolled out, and kind of talked through the pros and cons, and we just thought, a heavy-handed approach wasn't maybe the best approach. It is something I kind of struggle with, right? I mean, if if it's just kind of a, window dressing, how much are we really, effectively achieving? But there's really not much more we can do on an engineering front than, kind of the signs and barricades that we can deploy out there. So, what I would probably think is, in situations such as these, if things become overly problematic, right? If they're just, if there's an outcry that these things are not being respected, then there might be an opportunity for us to kind of see what our options are to remedy that, and maybe enforcement is part of that solution set, but it may not be the only part of the solution set. So again, I don't have a great answer, and I think this would be a good thing for the commission to chime in on too, in terms of what that preference might be, or when it might be appropriate to kind of elevate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think we had Councilmember Briggs and then Commissioner Balderrama, but I'm going to say something really quickly about the enforcement piece, which is that I think we talked about it a little bit last year. And yeah, as Commissioner Hess said, we really didn't want to come into it with a heavy-handed approach. I think it's one of the challenges when we're trying to balance the needs of different members of our community. And my inclination certainly is to continue the way we approached it last year, but definitely interested to hear other folks. So we're going to hear from Councilmember Briggs next.
Yeah. I would say that I can only speak for myself, obviously not council as a body, but I would tend to think that continuing with sort of the soft approach makes sense. So I would think that maybe rolling out this year, I'm not sure to the degree that in terms of past evaluation and thinking about new treatments, that could be some feedback going into this season about did folks feel like it was working? Did they feel like the traffic was actually moving slower? Was it, effective at achieving those goals? And I think maybe putting up those additional treatments at the feeder streets may help with that a little bit as well. But yeah, the soft approach, I think, will probably be viewed a little bit more favorably unless there's serious issues. For myself, I agree just kind of on the barricades issue. I'm glad to hear. I think the psychology of all of this is really important. And the engineers that you're going to be working with may be good at thinking about that, or it may be worth reaching out past the engineers and thinking about this really just from a psychology sort of perspective of how these treatments feel and what responses are and what color, how colors can make a difference, and even the look and feel and size of the signs and things like that might be helpful. The only place that I noticed sort of an issue last year, and this is just my own little travel patterns, I don't think there didn't appear to be coordination between construction and the slow streets. So on Miller, for example, Miller was closed. And a few times when I'd be driving down the street, I realized all of a sudden I'd get to a point where you really had to violate the healthy streets piece. You had to go down Chapin. Otherwise you were doing some weird U-turn maneuver in the middle of Miller, which didn't feel appropriate as well. So I think just coordinating to make sure that we don't put motorists in that position where they feel torn is important. But I'm excited.
Yeah, and thank you, Councilmember Briggs. Thanks for pointing that out. We were plagued by a pretty impactful construction season related to healthy streets, especially on the private development side. So, the situation you just cited was problematic because, not problematic in general, but that was a private development that was going up. It affected both the Miller-Catherine deployment as well as that Chapin deployment. So that had kind of a 1-2 punch. You had the DTE site on Main between Packard and William. That kind of shut down that block for several different time periods throughout the deployment. And a big one that we miscalculated, admittedly, was the effect of the Broadway Bridge because of the depot Fuller closure. All of that traffic that normally goes and accesses, the hospital and the medical complex off of M14 that might take Depot, pretty much all was using the Broadway Bridge and Maiden Lane. And what's interesting about this, and for those of you who've seen the big detailed report, we couldn't capture everything, but traffic was generally down last year. I think we reported on that. It was down between 50% to 25%, depending upon what time of year you were looking at. In August of 2020, Broadway Bridge traffic was higher than August of 2019, right? So just think about that. The rest of the community is down 50%, but on the Broadway Bridge, traffic was higher than the year previous because of the construction detour. And that was just one of those things that we just, we went in with the best intention in terms of what it was meant to achieve from a network perspective. But it really had kind of this bottleneck effect crossing over at that location that we, had a hard time kind of wrapping our head around. And that was one, admittedly, we should have done a little bit better job thinking through, because that was a city project. We should have been mindful of kind of that, detour sort of thing and affecting the Broadway Bridge. But, that the good news is the Depot project, or Fuller's, that's all open, as Nick, I think, can attest. And so I would suspect that the Broadway Bridge traffic is down to what we consider more normal, or maybe a little bit below normal COVID condition traffic volumes.
It's great to have that explanation of what happened with the Broadway Bridge, because I know that was a real sore spot for a lot of folks in cars this past summer. So Commissioner Balderrama.
I wanted to just contribute a little bit more in terms of just how we encourage folks to buy into the project, and how that, like Councilmember Briggs shared, that can be the psychology behind it. And so definitely having a shift in understanding like the value of the project, because if somebody just sees like a barricade, it's like, okay, immediate inconvenience, versus like, okay, this benefiting folks like beyond me, and really having that understanding. And I think that's going to require creativity on behalf of the folks who take the lead on that before we need escalation.
Commissioner Parsons, and then Boland, and then Hadamaki.
Yeah, Raymond, thank you so much for bringing this up and bringing it to us. I do want to say that in about an hour, I would assume, in this meeting, we're going to be discussing Healthy Streets and a committee that's going to be looking at this and working with staff. And so some of these, sort of real details are probably going to bear themselves out over the next couple months. That's not that I want to truncate this discussion, because I think it's going to make it all the more obvious why we need a committee to help, look at these issues. There's a couple things I do want to mention. One, I thought that Healthy Streets was a huge success, and I thought especially Neighborhood Streets, which we're talking about right now, was a fantastic success. Barriers, I think, are one thing that we could talk about, and we're talking about how to set up a feel so that that it's a corridor. And I think about bicycle boulevards. I think about shared streets, and it's not just the entry points that there's signals to drivers that this is a shared space. It happens all along the corridor. Either these are chicanes, either these are paint markings. So I think that the committee is going to be able to dive into those issues a lot, but there's a lot of solutions to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about that I think the committee is really going to dive into. The other thing I want to point out when it comes to the through streets and problems of spillover, there was about a year and a half ago, there was a major construction in the lower Burns Park area. I cite that just for geographical, so Stadium, Packard, it's really clear, what these geographical barriers are. Every single one of those residential entry points had a sign that said no through traffic construction zone. So we're okay under certain circumstances to advise people not to enter, and it's okay. There's a little spillover, that's fine. We'll figure out how to solve it. So I trust staff. I'm particularly heartened to hear about what happened with the Broadway Bridge. I think that's something we should communicate in some way. The city should at some point, because that was probably the most controversial of all the treatments. And now that we understand the explanation, it makes a whole lot more sense, and we can learn from it and move forward. So yeah, thanks for the time. Thank you, Raymond, for the presentation.
Okay, I think I'm up. So I lived near Arborview, and so I'm very familiar with the way that worked. And it's another one where there's like 4 or 5 blocks long. And one thing I noticed is that people slow down when they're going through the barricaded area. But then once you get through that, it just feels like the normal street. There was no signals to the drivers when you're on that 4 or 5 block stretch that you're supposed to be driving more slowly. And so I wonder if we could think about a way to kind of signal the drivers while they're on the stretch, because I think it relates to that confusion that Commissioner Hadamaki was mentioning with it looks sort of like construction barricades, but then there's no construction. And you're like, oh, okay, we're fine. So that was my thought. But I love the Healthy Streets program.
Thank you. Commissioner Hadamaki.
Yeah, I think this is a quick question. And by the way, I really like Commissioner Boland's idea about things along the street. But is there any way at all to, and Councilmember Briggs hinted at this, to reduce speeds to reduce speed limits? Yeah, I suspect the answer is no. But is there any way to have a healthy streets or neighborhood slow streets speed limit that's lower than 25? Much lower?
My understanding, and I think there's maybe some recent discussions on this subject, but my understanding is in the state of Michigan, the lowest possible posted speed limit is 25 miles per hour. And so that's not something I think we're probably positioned to change right now, or test the waters with. So that would be a pretty heavy lift in my understanding. It is something, just sidebar from my point of view, I find that to be fairly limiting. I wish that we had a little bit more latitude. I'm quite frankly, I'll show my true colors here for a second. I'm quite frankly appalled that in school zones, 25 miles per hour is acceptable. Almost every place I've lived, it's been like 15 or 20 miles per hour. And so to only have school zones at 25 miles per hour always frightens me a little bit. And, we've had lots of discussions about, can we drop it lower? Can we drop it lower? And we're told that no, the state law only allows a minimum speed limit of 25 miles per hour. So it's something, believe it or not, I'm trying to see if there are others in the state that would be willing to help us kind of have that discussion. If there's support from Grand Rapids and Lansing and Detroit about giving some municipalities more flexibility in that space, but I don't think we're going to be able to resolve that before the next Healthy Streets deployment.
I will add that that's also on our policy agenda, which we're voting on later this evening. That's one of the items that we have on there to encourage City Council to be lobbying on this exact issue. So that is we're gonna talk about that again in a little while. Any other comments and questions before I do mine? All right. So thank you, Commissioner Hess, as always. I have a couple of questions. Oh, so first of all, you had asked about what we thought about starting with the streets from last year or starting from scratch. And I would say that we should start with the streets from last year. I don't know what the most appropriate approach will be for communicating to those residents again, but given the feedback that was really positive and the fact that this was originally initiated by residents of these streets, I think it feels like a much more efficient approach to just start with them at the beginning. I also, and you know that this is what I'm going to say, I'm really interested in thinking about how we can approach some of this from a neighborhood perspective. So I know Councilmember Griswold talked about concerns about spillover traffic. I'm thinking about it more in terms of, if 2 of the streets in this neighborhood need this treatment, there's a pretty good chance that maybe the rest of the streets, if there's, for example, a series of cut throughs, I noticed last summer, one cut through street would have a Healthy Streets treatment. And then like when the next wave came out, the next 2 in that same neighborhood also had, they had signed up once it happened. And so I'd love to see us thinking about that at a neighborhood level from the start. I know that that's more complex and challenging, and starts to take it away from a resident initiated program and I think that was sort of a council instruction. I personally feel less strongly that it has to all come from the residents of the streets. But you know, I think that's something that we can hammer out in the coming year. And then my last question is about, you know, last year things happened really quickly. This year, I would love to see, oh, Ren, you need, anyway. I would love to see some more like intention behind if we're going to make some of these things permanent. Like if the streets that requested healthy streets also need traffic calming, if some of these streets where we gain bike lanes, if maybe we can gain those bike lanes permanently. So I know that's an open question, and I think probably open to some controversy, but that's another thing I want to see us thinking about going into it this year. Any other? Okay, great. Well, thanks very much. And I think our next item is also healthy streets, but of course I scrolled to the end of my agenda and now I'm a little bit lost, but yeah, here we go. So Commissioner Parsons and myself are going to propose the establishment of a Healthy Streets Committee. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to take volunteers to serve on that committee. Commissioner Parsons, do you want to sort of do a quick intro of what your thinking was around the creation of this committee?
Sure. I took as inspiration actually Linda Diane Felt's call and reminder of how important committee work is with this commission. I think it might have been last meeting, maybe 2 meetings ago, and I thought about, you know, what's important right now. What can committee do to help things move along? And the other inspiration, again, connected to Linda Diane and others that have worked on the 7th Street Committee, is I've been really inspired by not only the effort and the amount of time and energy, but the outcome that we're going to read about later today. This seems, with the Healthy Streets, a perfect opportunity to blend commissioners, staff, and some public members to not push through necessarily, but dive deeper into what happened last year, what worked well, what didn't work well, what recommendations we can do, and where could this go forward, even beyond next year. So it seemed like a really sort of a win-win-win. I think there's going to be people who are excited to be involved with it. So it was a way to try to bring these 3 entities together, you know, city staff, the public, and commissioners, to try to make this better as we move forward. So that was the impetus behind it. And I talked to Molly some, and she frankly took the ball and put it into words that are in the thing we're considering in a way that I very much appreciate. So yeah, Molly, you can take it from here.
Okay, sure. Kayla, do you think you could pull up the text of the charter so that we can be looking at it as we talk about it? So all of this is subject to, like, it's all open to discussion and revision. In terms of the composition of the committee, I suggested 3 to 4 Transportation Commission members. That's partly about not getting to quorum, but also partly just about making scheduling easier, and up to 3 members of the public. But again, that's like, if we don't get that much interest, we don't have to have that many. And I think there's other approaches as well. Give me just one moment. You have to do the rest yourself, kiddo.
Am I done?
Yeah. So that's the size. In terms of the duration, I thought it would be helpful to sort of lay out a timeline before the work of the committee got started, so that when people are committing, they know what they're committing to. So April is sooner than we think. And so I think ideally probably just 2 meetings before the implementation of Healthy Streets to give some real input and feedback. Also, to use this really as an opportunity for more public engagement. 1 to 2 during the operational period of Healthy Streets, so that we can help with course correction, or again, more public engagement as needed. And then 1 or 2 after to really review the data, similar to what we did as a full commission this year. And then the goals really, if you could just scroll down a little more, are to like provide feedback and recommendations, and then to enable another kind of opportunity for public engagement, really with a focus on equity. This is something that has come up a lot in conversations about healthy streets, and I think different people are using the word equity to mean different things. I was really meaning racial equity and socioeconomic equity, and maybe that's something we want to include in the text of the charter. And then the scope of the work, ultimately the goal would be to produce some feedback, potentially as a report or not, and we would need staff support. So that's the those are the details of the charter as I envisioned it. Maybe to start with, we can, like, if people have any suggestions for changes to this language, or I guess we can first debate whether or not we think we need to do a committee at all. I can't see everyone when we're in screen share. So if you can use the raise your hand function, I don't remember that working before, but it seems to be working now. If anyone has comments or feedback, maybe I'll see if you're raising your hand. If anyone's raising their hand, I can't see it. Just start talking. All right, so then why don't we talk about the language of the charter? Does anyone have any suggestions or changes for any of the wording of the charter? All right, so I think if we're good that we want to do this committee and we're good with the charter, who can, Commissioner Feld, did you? Oh, there we go.
I stopped share. Let me know if you want me to go back to it.
No, that's good. That's fine.
Yeah, just a quick comment that I think that education could be emphasized a bit more, because I think that's our softest way of enforcement. But otherwise, I think it looks really nice.
Great, thanks. Yeah, that's definitely fine with finding a way to add education a little more clearly in the work of the committee. Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, I think this is a great idea. I mean, it sounds like staff is working on this already, and so I think there's a challenge of just making sure it's not duplicating what they're kind of needing to move forward more quickly. Just make sure that it's really complementing the work that they're doing is important. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and I think the Transportation Commission, it can hopefully really pull from some of the criticisms of the program last year and really trying to build on that. I think being really receptive to reviewing what feedback was received last year that was negative, and trying to build on that. There was obviously a lot of public support for it as well, but just trying to learn from those lessons is wonderful. This is maybe broader that as well. There's a piece in there that is great, the more equitable community engagement piece of things. One thing that Councilmember Griswold brought up last night was an interest in that she was planning on working on a resolution around that. It's already something Transportation Commission is thinking about and working on. So I think that they're just thinking about how that works outside of this project too. Just thinking about that question maybe more broadly might also just be something that would be really good information to be able to think about, just helping to share what our processes are right now and how we might be able to improve them. And it sounds like it's of interest to other council members. So.
That's good to know. That might be something we want to talk about in a future meeting, thinking about public engagement just in general. I know We have a specialist in public engagement here with us every month, and maybe we could hear a little bit more about what those processes look like for transportation projects in general. It's been a while, I think, since we've talked about it, and of course, I'm sure it's looking really different these days. So that would be, I think, a really valuable thing to talk about in a future meeting. Any other feedback, suggestions? Great. So if everyone is all right with me and Kayla just working on finessing a couple of changes that we talked about, those changes around education and engagement and timeline, we'll do that, but it'll still be more or less what we've all just seen. So I heard from a couple of people who are interested in serving on the committee, Commissioner Balderrama and Commissioner Hadamaki. Are there other folks who would like to serve on the committee? Oh, and I was planning to take the lead.
If you want a council person, I am happy to participate because I know that I will be getting a lot of emails about this in a couple of months. So the more I participate, the more I know.
Okay, great. We can, I think, it'd be great to include you. Yeah. So if that, oh, yes.
And yeah, Linda Diane's hand is raised.
Oh, sorry. Oh, your wall is yellow and I did not see the.
You want it lowered? Okay, I'll lower your hand. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, so it sounds like we have a committee, we have a charter. Now we get to vote. Let me pull up my thing so I see exactly what we're trying to vote on. So is there a motion to, recommend that we establish a Healthy Streets Committee? Do we recommend it or are we moving to establish the committee?
I think we're moving to establish. I think you're correct,
Okay.
Molly.
Okay, so is there a motion to establish a Healthy Streets Committee on Transportation Commission, approve the proposed charter, and appoint me, Commissioner Hadamaki, and Commissioner Balderrama to the committee?
So moved.
Commissioner Boland, do we have a second? I saw Councilmember Briggs first, so seconded by Briggs. All those in favor, please.
Wait, did you include her in the list of people?
Oh, sorry, yes, and thank you for that adjustment, and also including Councilmember Briggs in the committee.
Okay.
Thank you. All those in favor, physically raise your hands. All those opposed? Any abstentions? And motion passes. Great, thank you all. So now we're going to do some more committee work. We now invite Commissioners Boland and Felt, as well as committee member Seth Peterson, to provide an update on the 7th Street Process Committee recommendations.
And I'm happy to share screen if you want to pull anything up at any time, just let me know.
So I can get started. It looks like I'm the only one of the three of us that's unmuted. So the our report comes in sort of two chunks. One chunk was our recommendations for kind of large street calming sorts of approaches generally, including 7th Street and talking about what had been done on 7th Street. And then the second piece, which was less well developed when we met a month ago, had to do with the process of 7th Street and trying to reflect on that process and what we can learn and lessons for the future. And one thing that became really clear to me just in this past month that wasn't at all clear to me before was this tension that exists between trying to quickly satisfy citizen complaints and setting up a real project that can be evaluated in a serious way. And so what seems to have happened with 7th Street was there was a sort of groundswell of neighbors complaining about speed. The city staff wanted to be immediately responsive, which sounds great, and I'm sure sounded great to the people who were complaining, but the solutions were kind of ad hoc as opposed to setting up a budgeted project to address the problem. And so what that meant was there wasn't any like, okay, let's assess the situation now and then measure improvement as we try these different solutions. That sort of thing didn't happen. And so it just kind of really struck me, and I think the rest of the committee also, that even though like quick solutions often sound great, there are some advantages to the slow, careful route also. And so that's part of our report now, those sort of reflecting on that. And that except for projects that are quite limited in the scope, that we recommend going the sort of budgeted project route with evaluation included as part of the process.
Was there more, Commissioner Felt, did you have things you wanted to add, or?
I think Julie said it well, and we're looking for an actual vote of the commission to support these reports to be forwarded to City Council.
And also, Seth, I just want to make sure you know you're also welcome to speak now if you've got anything further to add from the committee. Thank you.
Oh, I don't have a whole lot to add, given what's been said at the last meeting, as well as Julie's contribution. Just reiterating that, yeah, I mean, part of the challenge on 7th is just the tools that were available at the time, and I feel like there's a little more progress as far as tools to solve the problem along this corridor. At least that's my understanding in speaking with some of the folks at the city recently than we had at the time, and just that tension between the job of the traffic engineer is to move the traffic, and when you're asking them to stop moving the traffic, then it's sort of it's a hard problem to solve. So, but I think the city's been very receptive, and I think the results of this committee are a good step onto improving processes for other streets in town.
Great. So any comments, feedback on the reports?
So I could point out also that really what we're suggesting is that there be a traffic calming program for arterial streets, and that's a big chunk of it. And then addressing the ad hoc aspect as Julie described. So I think we identified some very interesting points, some of which I'll bring up with the plan as well.
Yeah, and certainly the issue with arterial streets and calming has come up lots of times since I've been on the commission, and so I think I think it would be great to push for some more systematic approach to that. Councilmember Briggs. You're muted.
Sorry. To Mr. Hess, when we've discussed this in the past, I think you had mentioned that there might be a need to think about possibly a consultant for an arterial traffic calming program. Do you still think that would be necessary, or do you think that if there was strong sort of policy support for moving forward with this sort of program, that there might be internal capacity to do something like this?
Well, and Kayla can probably help me out even more, but when we updated the neighborhood traffic calming program, that was right when I came on board back in 2018. That was all done in-house, and it was a fairly monumental undertaking. And it took a ton of staff time. Kayla worked on it pretty diligently for years. There was a lot of engagement. There was a lot of process. this commission helped with a lot of that as well, kind of fostering along and helping through some of the thought processes. My concern with a major streets traffic calming program is the complexity, right? Neighborhood traffic calming, for even as complex as it is, we kind of know what we're dealing with. We know what residents are, we know what the tools are in the toolbox. When we talk about major streets traffic calming, I think it kind of opens up a whole new universe. And I guess my preference would be to have some consultants help. I guess I should have led with that. And you know, could we do it in-house? I'd be hesitant to say yes. You know, we could look at best practices across the country and adapt some of that. But this will require a fairly intensive public engagement campaign, because again, this is affecting, you know, people that are using the corridor who may not live along the corridor. And so how do we find a way to kind of do that? And what are the you know, to me, the process is going to be very interesting on this, because it's going to have to be very different from neighborhood traffic calming. And I think having some other thoughts from consultants could help with that. So for what it's worth, this is, you know, one of our draft budget requests. Now, obviously, it's, as Councilmember Briggs knows, this is going to be a very tight budget year. And so we can't get everything we want, right? And that's always the case, but especially this coming year, that's going to be especially true. So I think the process would benefit from consulting help.
Thanks.
Other questions or comments? I mean, my sense on our job isn't to worry about the budget. Our job is to say what we want. So my inclination is to ask for what we think is needed. And if it doesn't make it into the budget this year, we can ask again next year. But that's just sort of thinking about the roles of the commission. I understand that Councilmember Briggs, it is definitely your job to think about the budget. But when I think about what the commission puts forward, I don't want us to be constrained by those kinds of things. Commissioner Parsons, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to say something?
Well, I just wanted to say that thank you so much to those involved with this whole process. I was familiar with 7th Street, but the amount of detail in history and just truly digging. And what I most appreciate is that we have ways forward that are going to impact not only 7th, but the entire community. So at this point, I want to move to accept these reports to present them to council. I just think it's fabulous work, and I truly appreciate it.
Great. I'm ready to accept that motion. Do we have a second?
I can second it.
Great. Commissioner Felt. We do still have a chance for further discussion after a motion has been made, in case anyone else wanted to say something that we haven't gotten to yet. All right, so we can take a vote. All those in favor of forwarding the reports to City Council. This is the thing we're acting on, right? Yeah, okay. All those in favor, physically raise your hand. All those opposed? Any abstentions? All right, and motion passes. Thanks, everyone. And yes, thank you very much to the 7th Street Committee. I think this committee has existed the entire time I've been on the commission, and it's been just a tremendous amount of work. So thank you. And now I'm going to invite Kayla Coleman to present the final draft of the commission's 2020 annual report.
Thank you, Commissioner Kleinman. So the annual report was provided with your agenda materials. I'm happy to share my screen and allow us to look at any specific sections upon request. But the quick overview is that the report provides a documentation of the Commission's activities over the past year. This includes motions and actions that were taken throughout 2020 and featured agenda items and presentations, as well as our reports, the reports and recommendations that were drafted during 2020. Those are the highlights. There were some feedback discussed when we shared this draft report in November, and that's been incorporated. So you'll see some new graphics that have been incorporated, and we received the statements from a few commissioners, so their narratives are included as a representation of how work played out over this past year. So thank you to the commissioners who provided that input in the report. That's really valuable. And the intention is that this report would then move forward to City Council to show City Council a record of what the commission was able to complete in 2020. And it's a really good archival material for looking back in the future when we reference the commission's work later on. So if there's any questions or any specific segments that you'd like to look at, I'm happy to pull those up. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to you, Molly.
Great. Any questions or feedback? I think we did take a look at this during our meeting in November. Is Gage's internship over?
No, Gage's internship is not over, but he has a capstone class this evening, I believe. So Wednesday evenings were no longer available. Otherwise, I would have asked him to be here because he really did the lion's share of the work on pulling this together. He's done all of the graphics and formatting and organization. So
he did a great job. Please extend my thanks to him for that.
Yeah.
It looks great.
Thank you. Will do.
Yes, Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, I was just gonna note, I was super impressed that there was a smiley picture of all of us that he took. I've never seen such a good Zoom screenshot. So kudos on that. It was a nice and a good report too.
Great. Thank you.
Great. So I'm not seeing any changes, then I think we can just go straight into a motion to approve the annual report as presented and forward it to City Council.
So moved.
Commissioner Felt, and the second, Commissioner Boland. Okay, everyone in favor, physically raise your hand. All those opposed? Any abstentions? And it passes. Thank you very much. Great. Oh, this is fun. So now it's January, and so I'm now asking for nominations for chair and vice chair of the Transportation Commission. So do we do one before the other? Does it matter? Do we start with chair?
We can start with chair and then move on to vice chair.
So I can you nominate yourself?
Yes, you can.
I'm going to nominate myself to be chair for another year. And I will also nominate Commissioner Boland to stay on as vice chair. Is there anyone else who, I didn't hear from anyone else about vice chair? Okay, great.
I also did not hear about, I'll just say, as from anyone else about chair either, but if there are any other interested candidates, we
that's
can
right. Yes,
hear that as well.
Great.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just put in a plug for being vice chair? I mean, I think you learn a lot. It's not a horrible amount of work. You don't have to lead the meetings unless the chair doesn't show up. And I've enjoyed it. I'm happy to do it again, but I encourage you to give it a whirl if you're interested.
Thank you. Anyone else want to throw their hat in? Looks like you're stuck, Julie. Great. So then I just need a motion, I guess. So do we do these separately or together, Kayla?
We can do them together.
Okay.
I think if anyone votes against if it's unanimous, we'll move along. If anyone votes against it, we may need to then vote separate.
Okay, great. So is there a motion to elect me, Molly Kleinman, as chair and Julie Boland as the vice chair of the Transportation Commission? Councilmember Briggs, and I'll take Mackey for the second. All those in favor, physically raise hands. We're taking a lot of votes tonight. All those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so that passes. We will stay on as chair and vice chair for another year. Thank you, everyone. I've really enjoyed being chair and having this opportunity. I've been learning a lot. And I also feel like it's taken me almost a year to get the hang of it. So I'm glad to have another year at it.
Thanks for being willing to serve.
Okay. Oh, and so now we wanted to talk about additional input for the fiscal year 22 policy agenda. So that was in your packet. I assembled because last year was so weird. I think, is it the council never created their policy agenda. And so we sort of put forward a bunch of recommendations that then just kind of sat. And so I started with last year's recommendations and then also got a lot of great suggestions from Commissioner Hadamaki. But we can also include more things if there's anything that people want to add. I sort of organized it by state level agenda. So what I wanted to see council lobbying for to the state, and then a local policy agenda, things that our council would be able to implement without having to take it to the state level. And we can take suggestions, feedback for any and all of those. I think I see Commissioner Felt, is your hand raised on purpose?
Yes.
Okay, great. So go ahead.
I had two additions to suggest. One is that it's come up a number of times that people would say, wouldn't it be great to have cameras for enforcement? And the answer, of course, always is can't do that in Michigan. And so I would suggest adding that, although we have not discussed it in any formal way that I'm recalling. But we might want to consider lobbying about that. And the other is that given that we just agreed about the arterial street calming, that would be a local agenda item as well.
Great. Those are both great suggestions. I do think we've talked about, it's come up in passing a lot, the automated enforcement. So yeah, I would be comfortable with adding that. I have privacy reservations about the technology in general, but I know that it's really effective. It's a really effective tool to reduce speeding. I'm sort of trying to scroll through looking for hands. And then, yeah, I think that makes total sense to add the arterial traffic calming to the local agenda. Other comments or additions? Just speak up if I am not calling on you, because that means I don't see you.
Madam Chair, this is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was seeing it was you I was calling on. Go for it.
Okay. I see Commissioner Hull has his hand up. I'll step back.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Hull.
Yeah, so I was mentioning there was two things that were in my email that, yeah, I mean, I think probably on here, just they aren't on here, but one would be, I know there's something about increasing transit funding, but I specifically said as far as like getting, I know this is more of a regional thing, but I think Ann Arbor should show its support for it, getting amendments to the RTA law to allow them to proceed without having all the counties on board necessarily, because that was a big problem why they didn't get it on the ballot this year. Well, that and COVID, but that was like that explicitly. And the other thing would be possibly stop using the level of service metric in favor of other metrics that are more like take into account the like emissions on the environment, while not like disfavoring like pedestrians and bicyclists and all that, and because level of service favors car travel. Like I know California switched to using VMT, something like that. Like,
yeah, that sounds great.
Those are both for the state level.
Yeah, maybe we change. So there would need to be a state level change in the RT in the Regional Transit Authority regulation.
Yeah, and I think so for the level of service thing too. I'm not sure if it's possible for the city to do that themselves or if it's a state thing that they require level of service be used.
Okay. Then we can put both of those in the state level agenda. Then that I think those are also great. And if you did email, I'm very sorry that I missed it.
Yeah, I mean, I sent it to Kayla, but
You may have included it in a message to me and I might have missed it.
No, I'm
it
sorry,
went to
Commissioner.
Kayla, but
Yeah, I'm sorry, Commissioner Hall. I don't recall seeing that, so I'll need to check my email and make sure it didn't get filtered incorrectly, but I did not see an email from you. So I apologize that your feedback wasn't incorporated here.
But yeah, we can definitely add those in. Any, oh, Commissioner Hall, or no, Hess, other 4-letter H name.
Yeah, no problem. I wanted, and I'm sorry I didn't share these earlier. It would have been more productive for me to have done that. I just wanted to share with you some of the other ideas I've been kind of bouncing around with some other communities in the state. The automated enforcement, Commissioner Felt already brought up. I think one of the things that would be interesting to get your all's read on is how speed limits are set, especially at the state level. You know, I think Nick can probably regale stories of the request to reduce speed limits on Washtenaw that actually led to an increase of speeds on Washtenaw, posted speed limits, because they strictly do the 85th percentile. But there's a lot of emerging research that suggests that that's maybe not the best way to set speeds, and that especially in different contexts, there are new allowances to use other ways to set speeds. And that might be something, especially since so many roads in communities are owned and operated by the state, you know, Ann Arbor being a prime example where you have, you know, Washtenaw, Huron, parts of Main Street, you know, I think that might be something for consideration. And then the other thing that kind of came to mind as you all were speaking is the A20 plan talks about adding new tools in our toolbox related to things like congestion pricing, tolling, parking, those sort of things. I only throw that out there just because, you know, again, tolling, as I understand, and congestion pricing is not permissible in the state. It is identified in the A20 plan, and it might align with, you know, what this commission might think is worth pursuing. So I just throw that out there, that kind of looking at some of these funding mechanisms in a new way to figure out how to solve for some of these funding issues that we talk about. That might be a way to do that if we look at, you know, VMT tax, which Commissioner Hull just alluded to. Some of those types of things might be on the you know, up for consideration as well.
Great. Those both sound great. So how, for the first thing you suggested, please don't. This was around setting speed limits. How would we word that differently from what we have? The speed limit thing?
Well, I see right now there's the removal of the statewide minimum speed, but I think there's an opportunity for allowing for different mechanisms for, and I'm sorry, I'm shooting from the hip here, but allowing for more context-sensitive speed limit setting in communities, especially where there's state trunk lines. So that's ultimately, I think, what it comes down to, outside of just using 85th percentile.
Got it. So changing, not just about changing the minimums, but changing how speed limits are set, giving municipalities more flexibility on that.
Well, and to clarify, and I'm sorry, this one would fall more under the state. Municipalities do have more flexibility to set speed limits on our roadways. However, my understanding is at a state level, they're very prescriptive in terms of how they set them on state roadways.
Got it.
And so trying to allow some more flexibility and a little bit more community input into how those are set, or at least different mechanisms that are data-based that are not just the 85th percentile.
Yes, that I'm fully on board with that. That sounds great. Other additions, changes? Commissioner Carson, found you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if this is so much an addition or correction for this specific document, but Raymond brought up some really good points, particularly with, you know, the draft plan that's coming out soon for our transportation network. It sounds like there might need to be some state level exemptions there. So I'm wondering if there's time to allow staff to incorporate some of those necessities into our document. I'd hate to wait another year before we revisit this. So I'm just floating that idea to see what folks think.
Kayla, maybe we can switch back to not screen sharing. Any thoughts about that? Sounds like we're good. Oh, Council.
Yeah, personally, I'd love to see, staff recommendations incorporated in this as well. I'm on the policy committee and we'll be pushing hard for all the transportation stuff. I know that we have limited lobbying power in terms of all the different pieces. So I think another piece that might be helpful to some degree is, especially from kind of a staff perspective, if there's momentum building, if there's momentum building behind one of these areas and you like a special push on that from policy committee side, that would be helpful to know, like if there's one of these that we really want to champion this year too, because obviously they're all important, but we might have more momentum. You might know that there's more momentum behind one area than another.
I mean, certainly the thing that one of the things that keeps coming up is about giving cities the more flexibility with state trunk roads. That's been a real ongoing frustration for a lot of us. I don't know that it's like the number one thing, but it's certainly a thing that we end up talking about a lot.
And sorry, if I may, you may have had a commission discussion about this previously, so let me know. I can go back and watch it if you have. But I know there's been discussions in other communities, I think Kalamazoo and other, where the city is taking on the responsibility of some of those trunk lines. I'd be curious to hear, staff's thoughts on what that would look like if we assumed responsibility. Obviously, there's a lot of costs associated with it, but there's a lot more control. So perhaps after MDOT does construction on North Main.
Yeah, I can jump in there real quickly. We haven't gotten any serious discussions about it. I know MDOT would love to turn them over to us and not have to deal with them anymore. The biggest concern is the cost that comes along with that. We get through Act 51, we get money for every street in our network, and if we added those, they would be added to our network. We would get money for them, but it's widely understood that the money that we get to maintain roads from Act 51 is not wholly adequate for maintaining them to the condition that we would like them to be in. So, certainly, if we let MDOT resurface North Main, for example, and then maybe offer to take it over, or as part of that deal take it over. I know in Kalamazoo there was that's an example. You used that example, and Kalamazoo got a very big payout from I shouldn't say very big. I don't know if it was big enough to to actually to account for the cost of what would need to be done to the roads that they took over. But I think MDOT sounds to me that they're willing to to pay the city to take them over. The big question is North Main's the small piece. The big piece is the Jackson Huron Washtenaw corridor, and the last thing they did on that was in maybe 2008, and it was a very thin mill and fill, kind of Band-Aid type treatment. That road in reality has deteriorating concrete pavement underneath it. It needs to be reconstructed. So if we were to really entertain taking over those systems, we would have to do some careful analysis on what the price is that would actually make it worthwhile, so that we wouldn't, really sink ourselves in terms of long-term maintenance costs for taking over a road that needs to be completely rebuilt, which is quite expensive. So.
But if we rebuild it how we want it.
Absolutely. That's the great part of that, is that there's a lot of things we could do on those, roads that would make them a lot better, from a community standpoint. But there's balances there, between those two things. So it's a thing, and it's out there, and it's probably take years of negotiation and careful analysis if we were to approach doing that.
It's news to me that the state is willing to turn those over, or that they want to. So that's
they drop hints all the time.
great. Well, then maybe we add this to our policy agenda in some way, shape, or form to begin those conversations. If we think it's going to take years, let's start talking now about what that might look like, because we're reimagining Washtenaw, right? Let's really do it. Uh-oh. I froze. Can you all hear me? Okay, my video is frozen, unfortunately. Okay, so other things to add. I'm still here. I'm just gonna try resetting my video. There we go.
Does action need to be taken on this tonight, or can it be postponed to the next meeting so that the suggestions that were brought up can be kind of incorporated in a coherent manner, I guess?
A good question.
The feedback is due to the board and the staff person who coordinates all the boards and commissions on February 1st. So we will not have an opportunity to vote on this again. I think if we can agree that if the commission can agree in general to all of the topics that you want to see incorporated, then staff can work with the commission chair, Molly Kleinman, to have those changes made, and we can circulate the final draft by email, and commissioners can respond if there are any concerns. In that case, if there's something that we feel needs to be brought back for a vote, I can work with that staff person and see if we can possibly get an extension or send a draft of the feedback and then update that at a later time.
Great.
If that all sounds good.
Commissioner Boland.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what Councilmember Briggs said about prioritizing, and I wonder if we're not helping ourselves by getting a longer and longer list. Should we also be talking about things that maybe are on the list now but aren't very high priority?
I guess, Councilmember Briggs, if there's something you can say on that in regards to your role on the policy.
Yeah, personally, from on the local side, I'm fine with seeing a long laundry list. It's really helpful to be able to see all the things that Transportation Commission is interested in having, and I think having that policy, that long list is helpful. I think and I am just guessing. This is more conjecture on the state side. I can imagine with our kind of limited lobbying dollars that it may be useful to really press for the lobbyists to be working and pushing on one particular area more than others. And there may be some that, Mr. Hess mentioned that there's already some work happening between different communities on some issues. So that's where I was thinking that just if there was anything in particular that I should be hammering on at each policy committee meeting, I am happy to do that, but I'm not sure which one.
That's really helpful. I wonder, trying to think if there's a quick way for us to sort of get the temperature of everyone on the commission in terms of, like, if you had to pick your favorite for statewide, like each individual's top priority, that might help us surface a handful of priorities. I don't know that there's we don't have polling set up in this kind of Zoom, but
I believe I can create a poll. I think we tried that before and it didn't work, but I'd be willing to try to throw one together
maybe we can also just do it. You know what, let's say if you have a top priority on that statewide list, just send an email to me and Kayla, and then we'll be able to sort of compile and see if there are a handful that rise to the top. The one thing I wanted to say, Councilmember Briggs, about the crosswalk legislation is that kept coming to us from council. And so we made recommendations, sort of blanket recommendations about a state law just to hopefully stop it from coming back to us. I don't know that there's as long as we get to keep our ordinance, I don't think that was as high a priority for the commission. It'd be great if the whole state of Michigan got some more, crosswalk, like a crosswalk law as strong as ours. But it was more about defending against attempts to invalidate the law. That's just a little bit of background on that specific issue. Commissioner Parsons, did you want to?
Well, I just wanted to say, if we want to take a stab, I think on one of the most pressing issues that I see come up repeatedly, it's local freedom to set their own speed limits, be it on trunk lines, be it within the city, and as well as the minimum in neighborhoods. So for me, that rises very high, very quickly. And so I don't know, we could take the temperature real quick and just let Councilmember Briggs know that this is at the top of our list right now, or at least close to it. I assume it's going to make the top 3, if not higher. Anyway, I just wanted to float that sort of as a friendly communication, and these are recommendations for council to pass along to the state or the federal level, and so temperature in the room might be quick. I'll stop talking. Yeah.
Everyone, if you feel like speed limits are like one of the really top ones, thumbs up. All right, we've got a lot of thumbs. So yes, I would say that that's a big priority for us this year. Are we ready to take a motion to make the revisions that we've discussed, but at that point to approve the policy agenda input and forward to City Council?
So moved.
All right. Parsons, and can I have a second? Boland, I see. Okay. All those in favor, physically raise hands.
Could I, before we take the vote, could I do a recap of what I've captured as just at a high level? So we're all voting with an understanding of what's to be incorporated. So something around video surveillance or automated enforcement of speeding or traffic violations, support for RTA regional transit, support for removing the emphasis on level of service metric in favor of other metrics.
For the RTA one, it was, I think, specifically about being able to move forward with an RTA without all counties or whatever the government bodies are. Sorry, Commissioner Hall, you're muted.
Allowing more flexibility over the area that would participate.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And so then we were on to how speed limits are set. So that's having the local control over speed limit setting, which captures de-emphasizing the use of 85th percentile and context sensitive speed limit setting on state trunk lines, congestion pricing, tolling, VMT tax. Those were they were mentioned by Commissioner Hess, I think maybe Commissioner Hull as well, but that didn't get as much discussion. Is that something that should also be incorporated?
So that was coming from the vision, the A20 recommendations, right? So that was a sort of coming out of the climate goals, but as something that we could potentially support from the commission as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe those are identified. And again, I can't recall off the top of my head which of those is in the sequence of the A20 plan, but I believe like a sort of tolling congestion pricing thing is baked into the A20 plan.
Anyone have strong opinions against adding that? All right, so then yes, I think we can add that in as well. I like the idea of just lending some additional support for the recommendations of the A20 plan when
okay.
we do that.
And I'll just circle back up to one. I just got a message shot over to me from Commissioner Hutchinson about speed limit setting, the reminder that also emphasizing speed limits that are the removal of the 25-mile-per-hour minimum, that is already captured in what the draft policy agenda notes that were circulated. So that's why I didn't mention it here as something to be incorporated, but just to make note to everyone that that would also remain in addition to those other aspects of speed limit setting. Couple other items, the major street emphasis for the local agenda and the major street traffic calming program development. And then perhaps there will be some language to separately denote the priority item, again, related to the local control of speed limit setting. I think that captures it. If I missed something, please speak up. I think you could also shoot it over by email, but we should should generally reflect what was discussed here. So if there's something else major that I didn't just say, please let me know.
I think that was all of the things. So that sounds great. So yes, thank you. And thank you everyone for the suggestions. So I think now we're ready to vote. So all those in favor of approving this agenda and forwarding to council? And all those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, one abstention, and the motion passes.
And who abstained? Sorry, I missed it.
Valderrama.
Okay, thank you.
Great, and so I think now we're up to staff report and updates. I feel like this is the first meeting in a while you've actually had time to talk at all. So here we go.
I'm going to eat up all 29 minutes. No. Well, what's exciting about, the November, December reports are always kind of exciting because you see a bunch of stuff that finishes up and wraps up. And the January report is kind of exciting because there's a bunch of new stuff that comes online. And so, Nick did the lion's share of all these new projects that have come in. So I'll take all the credit for his hard work that he put into this report because he allowed me to do so. So I'll just kind of go through, I'll highlight the new additions and some of the new language as is kind of our common practice, and you'll just notice some new things that have popped up this iteration that you haven't seen in the past. So annual street resurfacing, this language is fairly similar, but there is work being done on the 2020 resurfacing or 2021 resurfacing program. And so when that list is available, it will be posted online. Plymouth Road Phase 2, this is preventive maintenance project, and it's very similar to what was done just further to the east on Plymouth, so it's kind of just extending it further. Geddes Road water main, this is water main replacement between Windy Crest and Earhart. No changes to the roadway are expected, but it will impact traffic as a result of detours. Scioto Church, we've talked about this before. There's water main, storm water work, resurfacing, installation of bike lanes, new sidewalks and crosswalks. City Council did approve the removal of on-street parking in favor of the bike lane. I think we reported on that in the past, but construction is scheduled to begin spring of 2021. Fuller Court Sidewalk Gap, just pretty much the boundaries of the project have been updated from Fuller Court to the east edge of the University of Michigan property. Maiden Lane and Nielsen Court signal, this is a new one that you haven't seen before. New traffic signal is installed at the intersection of Maiden Lane and Nielsen Court. This is actually two projects that affected this. There was the new development there on the corner, 1140 Broadway, as well as the University of Michigan parking garage. The University of Michigan paid the lion's share of this project as a result of kind of the impact of their parking garage. So that signal is now up and running. Sidewalk gaps, these are similar to what you've seen in the past. Barton Drive, Boardwalk, Jackson, Manchester, Scioto Church, Simpson, and Yost are all tentatively scheduled for 2021. Bridge maintenance projects. There are some bridges that are expected to be maintained in 2021, Broadway, Fuller, and Island Drive. Note Broadway is mentioned there, so that might have bearing on some of the discussion we had earlier about healthy streets. People-friendly streets, we've talked a lot about that. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is the DDA's People Friendly Streets. So first wrapped up construction for the season. Probably the most exciting thing to note here is the last sentence in this section talks about that People for Bikes ranked the First Street Bikeway as one of America's best new bikeways of 2020. So that's exciting that we're DDA is getting some national recognition for their projects. And the next iteration of People Friendly Streets public engagement is planned to start in February and March. So stay tuned for that. I'm sure at your next meeting, we'll have an update on specifics. And as is always the case, Kayla will share those as soon as, you know, any dates or workshops are scheduled. Those will be shared with the Transportation Commission. Platte Road and Earhart design work on the project is starting shortly and construction is scheduled for 2022. 7th Street in Greenview. This project consists of water main replacement, resurfacing on South 7th Street between Scioto Church and Greenview, and includes stormwater improvements, and may also include things such as road narrowing, rain gardens, sand filters, and underground stormwater storage. So, you know, if you're familiar with the Lansdowne neighborhood over by Lawton, you know, there's some kind of drainage issues, flooding issues down there that this project hopes to address. The other thing that there's a possible opportunity here, if you know kind of the history on that section of South 7th Street, it was kind of overbuilt because it was expected to connect further to the south. That connection ultimately was never made. So 7th Street has it's wider than you would expect on a typical residential road. And so that will allow for some opportunities to kind of reconfigure, you know, and add in some of these kind of green design elements and possibly bike lanes as well. State Street from Huron to William. This is a partnership with the DDA, and it includes resurfacing, water main work, non-motorized improvements, and streetscaping. Healthy Streets we've talked a great deal about. The thing to note, the one update here is that Council did approve the design authorization budget last night for us to move forward. So we're going to start cranking on that here real shortly, and obviously we'll you know, have discussions with the new committee that was formed this evening as well. Lower Town Mobility, not a lot to really mention here aside from the fact that there was a public survey that was online. It just recently closed last week, and the team right now is analyzing those results and figuring out how to, you know, incorporate that feedback into some of the design recommendations. Mdot Coordination, we did add kind of some updates on that. Huron and Thayer crosswalk. This is something we've reported on over the course of the last year or more. It looks like we are settling on a solution there. These will be side-mounted rectangular rapid flashing beacons. We went from hawk signals or pedestrian hybrid beacons, the red flashing, to overhead RRFBs to side-mounted RFBs. A lot of the design has changed as a result of kind of historic properties and the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, and some of the concerns that they raise. So this is the solution set that looks like it's moving forward. There will be some streetlight enhancements as well as part of the project, and that project is expected to be installed later this year. Huron and 7th, at the request of Councilmember Rumlawi, oops, sorry about that. We had reached out to Mdot to try to get them to look at the kind of offset intersection of Huron and 7th. We expect a memo to come from Mdot here shortly in terms of what their recommendation is. We think that what they're going to request or suggest is maybe limiting southbound left turning movements, but allowing a dedicated northbound left turn movement off of 7th. So stay tuned, there'll be more information. You don't have to wrap your head around that just yet. We're still waiting for the final memo to come through, but that's what we expect to hear from Mdot. And then another thing that maybe you haven't heard of before is Jackson and the I-94 East ramp. Mdot is moving forward with a signal at that location. This is kind of something that's been talked about for a while. And so that allows us to also put in a pedestrian crossing there as well. This has been a struggle for us to figure out a way to get pedestrians across this section of Jackson. We had tried to do something over by Weber's. This is obviously not immediately adjacent to that location, but is a little further up the road. But this signal will allow for that improvement to be incorporated as well. A couple things that are not necessarily the cities, but have recently hit the news that I wanted you all to be aware of. The first is the Detroit to Ann Arbor Connected and Autonomous Vehicle Corridor. This was kind of late last year where the governor announced this partnership with Google and kind of one of their new subsidiaries called Cavnu, where they want to create a sort of connected autonomous dedicated vehicle lane between Detroit and Ann Arbor. Things are starting to kind of ramp up on that project. We've had some initial conversations with Cavnu and some of the Mdot and jurisdictions. We're just in the very early stages of those discussions, so stay tuned. I'm sure you'll see future report outs from us on that issue. University of Michigan did get a nearly $10 million grant for smart intersections. A lot of this is going to kind of build off a lot of what we call the Ann Arbor Connected Vehicle Test Environment and kind of building new technologies into that. So I'm going to use a whole bunch of words that I don't know what they mean, but that current system is built off of a digital short range communication, or DSRC. And the idea is maybe, looking at kind of upgrading that to 5G and some other things. So there are a lot of different aspects of this big grant, but this is to try to kind of keep this research going from University of Michigan. It's a pretty exciting announcement because it's a big award. May Mobility also got an award for inclusive design, which is pretty exciting. The idea here is it's a design challenge, I think, in order for connected and autonomous vehicles to be able to allow people with who are in wheelchairs for independent loading and passenger securement. So they got a $300,000 grant just recently for that. So we'll see how we'll be monitoring that. We're not directly involved, but I do have check-in calls with May Mobility from time to time. So we'll see if there are updates that we can share with the commission. The Office of Sustainability has been working on an EV readiness ordinance, and if I was following the conversation correctly, that did pass last night at City Council. So this requires kind of new buildings and major building retrofits to make sure to include electric charging for electric vehicles. Since your last report, the Office of Sustainability has gotten the funding to finish their DC fast charging installations in the amount of $170,000. So that's exciting for them as well. Streetlight implementation, just, the updated figures that we always provide, 34 streetlights were installed in 2020. 1,400 outages were addressed by DTE. DTE has roughly 5,000. So, it just kind of goes to show how many streetlights they have to address in a given year. So this kind of wraps up what we saw for 2020, and I'll start reporting next month on what we're observing for 2021. Traffic calming, just a quick timeline update. Glenwood, which you recommended for approval at your last meeting, is going to City Council on February 16th. And then the last thing on the report is the transportation plan update. Again, this was something that you made a recommendation on at your last meeting, which was then forwarded to City Council. City Council also approved to release it for community review. So that was similar to the recommendation that you all made. Again, as a reminder, this will be coming back to you once we kind of get that feedback, and make updates to it. It'll kind of go back through another sequence of review and approval through all the different bodies. And that concludes my report, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Oh, yeah, Commissioner Hadamaki.
Yeah, question about the sidewalk gap scheduling. So some of these I think are scheduled to begin before the revenue for the new millage starts coming in, right? So I guess generally speaking, is there been any discussion or appetite for front loading a lot of the sidewalk gap filling earlier in the entire 10-year life of the millage? You know, if we can expect a certain amount of revenue from the millage over 10 years, can we front load a lot of the sidewalk gaps in the first few years? And then maybe there isn't any work at the end, but at least we get the benefits sooner. Can you bond against future expected millage revenues?
I can try to answer part of that question. At council meeting last night, the council approved a couple of resolutions that would allow us to short-term finance some of the sidewalk work from general fund, which would then get paid back once we start collecting the millage revenue in July. That's a short-term thing. We have one project that was already actually the Jackson Road one that we already actually had a contractor for, so we want to take advantage of that. The other projects that we're doing in 2021 are we needed some design money so that we could put together finish the designs, put together the packages, and send them out to bid. And then construction on those would start, probably in August. In terms of the long term, I'm not that aware myself about how the bonding and everything works. I'm speaking a little bit on my area of expertise here, but I doubt that would be a worthwhile way to go, because I think we wind up paying more money that way on the interest. But again, I'm not an expert on that. If the stuff that we're doing now is just very, like I said, very short-term fronted from the general fund, and in July it gets paid back. So that's a minor action to do that. But what you're talking about, what I think would be a pretty substantial effort to need to do that, and I'm not even sure if it's viable or not. So I couldn't really respond to that right now.
Just a quick note on that is I mentioned it to this is an informal mayor's AMA on Sunday during his Facebook AMA, and he seemed, to him it seemed like a plausible option, because he thought construction inflation would possibly exceed our historically low interest rates right now. So just, that was his very informal, off the record insight onto it.
Any other questions?
I do.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I have two. The first is perhaps easy. There was the rumor that somehow the hawk signal at Chapin and Huron would be moved to Thayer. And so are there plans to continue the hawk signal at this point if they're not going to be using it there, or any changes coming up with that?
Yeah, so I think maybe there's good news there. That is expected to be a full signalized intersection. That's part of the discussion that DDA had with Mdot, and the city was part of. And so the hawk signal at Chapin and Huron will be removed and replaced with a full signal. But that will then probably hit the scrapyard in terms. I mean, it's Mdot signal, so I don't know what they do with it, but it will not be relocated to Thayer. That was something that was considered at one point. But the problem that we ran into is anything overhead was problematic from the State Historic Preservation Office. And so hawk signals have to be overhead. And that's why ultimately it's now side mounted RRFBs, rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Okay, thanks. The second part can kind of be brought up here as well as for the agenda setting. It occurs to me that the sidewalk gap issue, if this is what's going to happen in 2021, then we're still not getting to the sidewalk gaps that involve stairs. And that's been 5 years of talk now. And I hate to think that it's going to be another 5 years.
the danger of those sidewalks appear larger and larger to me every day, particularly before we get an ADA lawsuit or something like that. And so I think that we should, as a commission, talk about the issue of how to move that into a higher priority. I'm all in favor of the sidewalk gaps that have been identified, but as far as danger and usability, this should be a higher priority. The 7 or so that we identified that are steps, particularly if you're in a wheelchair.
If I can jump in there on that, these are two separate issues. The new sidewalk millage that was passed is not is for gaps in the sidewalk system. For the locations where there are steps in the sidewalk system, that the new sidewalk millage is not needed for that. We just dusted that topic off just last week. Actually, we had a meeting among staff about it, and we had the list compiled of locations where we had those, and we went through and reviewed those locations. The good news on that is that majority of the locations that are on that list are encapsulated within various capital projects that are coming up in the next few years. So a lot of those will be able to be addressed, hopefully, as part of those capital projects that are going to be happening. So that's I think 4 of them were on Getty's Avenue, for example, there is in 2022 a resurfacing scheduled of that section of Getty's, and we're hoping to be able to address those at that time. It's not going to be easy. Some of those are going to be extremely challenging, but that's something we're going to be looking at as part of that. And then there was one at 3rd and Krause that we were that kind of didn't fall into any category where there is any immediate work, and we were going to do some topographic survey work on that and start putting together some potential designs to see if it's feasible to eliminate those. That one's going to be really hard from an ADA perspective because of the steep grade coming down 3rd there. So, yeah. But so there is movement on that. Like I said, we just had to talk about it last week. So,
thanks, Nick. That's good to hear. Previously, I had brought it up and it had been identified as a sidewalk gap issue, so that's why I was talking about it in that context. And there is one on State Street in Kingsley or Lawrence. I can't remember what. Just
State and Kingsley was we that one's gone.
Okay.
We did that one last year. Well, last year, like 2019, I think. So those steps have been eliminated.
I haven't been out.
Understandably.
Great, thank you. Maybe we can get the staircase elimination stuff onto an agenda later this year, so we can just get an update, especially now that there's movement on it. That would be good to hear about. I'm going to keep us moving because it's almost 9. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Balderrama, were you just moving? Okay, great. So then I'm going to.
Can I ask just one? Yeah, just one quick thing. And I should know this, but does this report get forwarded on to council, this great list of things that are coming up in the year?
The monthly staff report, it's prepared every month, and it is provided as part of the city administrator's communications to city council.
Thank you. I will draw council's attention to it then in future.
Thank you, Councilor. I appreciate that. Okay, so the next thing is liaison reports. So any commissioners who specifically serve as a liaison to another body or organization are invited to provide brief reports and updates.
Oh, yeah.
Commissioner Hull and then Commissioner Smith.
Yeah, so I the Commission on Disability Issues met today, and we discussed the landscaping ordinance a little bit, and we passed a resolution. We essentially didn't see any issue with it from a disability standpoint. The other thing I just wanted to bring up is that the RTA, Citizens Advisory Council, is accepting applications on the website to join it. And yeah, the meetings, even before COVID, you could participate virtually in the meetings. So don't let fear of having to drive to Detroit keep you from joining. Just yeah, like, and that's all I wanted to share.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. Just wanted to update folks that starting on Monday, we have another route restored in the Ann Arbor area. It's the Route 26 on Scioto Church. Schedule's on the website, but it filled in one of the gaps that we had in our map from our pandemic planning. We also restarted 62, which we had paused for the winter break for U of M. And we are in the process now of doing planning for more service restoration come August, and I'll have an update, a small update about that in February, and then a larger one in March.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Hall.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up to that because I noticed the update where they added the service. They also made some changes to Route 23, essentially to add additional time to the run. But the result means that it arrives off cycle from almost every other bus on nights and weekends. And this actually adds like 15 minutes of wait time to anyone who's transferring from that route. And that just seems like a really bad result. And I sent an email about this a while back, and I haven't gotten much response on that. I don't know if there was absolutely no alternative to that, and it just seems like a very undesirable result. And it's actually was thinking about bringing this up at the board meeting, but because it seems like there wasn't very much of an avenue for public input there, and though it was kind of vague, you would have had to read the schedule to realize what was going on with this. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up as kind of a concern, and I'm hoping this can be corrected before August, because because this makes a lot of people wait 15 minutes extra for a transfer.
Okay, thank you for that, and I will follow up with our planning staff about input that they've gotten.
Thank you. Any other liaison updates? Councilmember Briggs, I can't tell if your hand is, yes, okay.
Yeah, so a couple things got mentioned regarding decisions council made last night. The Healthy Streets, approving $40,000 for design on that. The EV policy, I don't think was mentioned that we also rescinded the policy that requires council to approve all road diets. So that is a nice change, in my opinion. And then just a heads up that we are also, a few council members and I and staff are beginning to discuss the removal of parking minimums. So that is just in the beginning, beginning phases of discussions, and obviously not public facing yet, but just a heads up that those discussions are beginning.
Great, thank you. Very exciting updates. Let's do all the road diets quick. Any other liaison? Oh yes, Councilmember Briggs.
I'm sorry, one other thing. I just wanted maybe to use this opportunity to praise our talented city transportation staff for all of the great work that they do every day for the city. I was a little dismayed by some of the council comments last night. And I think that sometimes those council meetings can be particularly hard on city staff, and they were some completely unwarranted comments last night, or inappropriate. So hopefully unwarranted as well. But anyway, I just wanted to publicly apologize for what I thought was a little bit of a difficult meeting if you were a staff member, transportation staff member. So thank you.
Thank you. And now is the time for general commissioner updates. Anyone, any commissioner who has any updates, you are welcome to share. Okay, and all right, call for agenda items. Seems like we've sort of come across a few over the course of the conversation tonight. Are there other any other agenda items we missed?
To get us going, I'll just give the recap of what I'm expecting for the February meeting is the 2021 street resurfacing and related projects presentation. We have on the work plan transit supported zoning discussion. I'll still be following up with us to see where planning commission is on that. I'm not sure if that's ready. I will have a placeholder in case there's any news from the Healthy Streets Committee, or if there are other appointments. If any members of the public are identified to serve on that committee, we can approve those at the February meeting. I also captured a few agenda items that were mentioned. These won't come necessarily in February, but what I heard during the meeting tonight was a possible future discussion on equitable community engagement, discussion of local control of state trunk lines, sidewalk stair removal. And then I wanted to call attention to Commissioner Hull noted that the Disability Commission made a resolution related to I believe to Chapter 40, the vegetation ordinance, and to make sure that the rest of the commission noticed that there was a communication in the agenda packet. It was filed under public comments because we received it from, I guess perhaps it should be really, it's sort of a liaison communication, although we don't have a formal liaison from Environmental Commission, but we received an email from the chair of Environmental Commission noting that they did take an action and recommended that council establish a group to look further at Chapter 40, and that group would include representatives from transportation, disability, and environmental. So I think commissioners should make sure to take note that that was included with your agenda materials. And then you can let me know if that is something that you want on a future agenda for discussion or want to wait until there's further council direction on that.
Thank you.
Which we don't need to discuss right now, but just to note.
Great. And as always, if you think of other agenda items that you would like to add after the meeting, you can send an email to Kayla and myself, and we will work those into the agenda. In terms of appointments, I also want to just note that we still don't have a representative from the Planning Commission, but now that they are fully appointed, it would be great to nudge about getting someone from planning into the.
It's my understanding they'll make that appointment at their meeting tomorrow.
Oh, great. Cool. So we'll have someone new next month. Great. And I think that's now everything. So if there are no objections, pausing, looking for objections, I will now adjourn our January 20th meeting. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks. Have a good night.